Thank you for tuning in to the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center's Pilobolus Dance Talk in support of their performance on Saturday, February 26th at 8 p.m. I'm Annie Hoffman, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager here at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center. This opportunity is brought to you with support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Office of the Mayor. Our panelists will be providing visual descriptions as they introduce themselves for those who are blind or have low vision. My visual description is, I have pale white skin, shoulder length straight blonde hair, I'm wearing glasses, a dark shirt with a patterned black and white blazer, and I have a virtual background of the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center behind me. I would now like to introduce our moderator, journalist Jordan Levin, who will introduce our distinguished panelists. Jordan?
Thank you, Annie. Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan Levin. I am a dance critic and arts writer and Miami cultural maven. I am a late middle-aged white woman with graying brown hair in a dark red top with CDs, pictures, and random inspirations on the light green wall behind me. And I am really excited and honored to be having a conversation with the co-artistic directors of Pilobolus, Renee Jaworski, I hope I'm saying that right, and Matt Kent, who are joining us through the magic of Zoom from their home base in Connecticut.
Yes.
Stay warm. So Matt and Renee, why don't you introduce yourselves, please, and then we'll talk.
Hi, I'm Renee Jaworski, and I am a middle-aged white woman with pale skin, medium length, light brown hair, green eyes, and I'm sitting in front of a black and white poster next to a glass of beer.
Yeah, and what about me? I'm Matt Kent. Yeah, and come on. I'm in my late 40s, white male. I have curly brown hair, cleft chin. Renee and I were dancers with Pilobolus, and we still look like we were dancers in Pilobolus. And I've got a white sweater on with a lovely wooden little heart pin that Tommy Simpson gave me. Also sitting by my glass of ale with some plants behind us, and behind us both is a poster of, I guess, 6 Pilobolus dancers, but they look like there's only 2 of them because they're wearing the other guys, and they have like feet and legs and shins where their head should be, and they're got the other guys wrapped around their waist. So it's a very Pilobolian kind of background here. This is a poster from, oh my God, I don't even know when. It's probably
74 or something.
Yeah, it's almost 50 years old, and we're so happy to be here. You mentioned our town that we still work and live in, and Pilobolus has been located in Washington Depot, Connecticut for almost all of that 50 years. Whatever it's been now, Renee, what, like 40?
Yeah, I think it's been around
45 years of it. And we would also like to take the opportunity to say that this land that we live and work on and are inspired by, because we take a lot of inspiration from the outdoors, is the ancestral homeland of the Wiatnag and the Putatuk people, and they're collectively known now as the Scatticoke. And they have lived here since time immemorial and were stewards of this land, and they still are here. And we have the opportunity to work with the Scatticoke tribal nation sometimes. And we think that in the spirit of healing, it's important to acknowledge our past and where we came from, regardless of heritage or any differences, in sort of mutual respect, so that we can move forward into healing.
All right, thank you. Thanks to both of you. So it's apropos that you made that reference to history and other people's history, because we're talking to Matt and Renee because Pilobolus is celebrating their 50th anniversary tour. A year late, thanks to COVID, 22 instead of 21.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you about the company's history because Pilobolus is such a unique company in so many ways. So, for those who don't know, it was started by a group of mostly non-dancers at Dartmouth College in 1971. And we're talking about, we're all familiar with the like back to the land, hippie, creative ethos that was happening in New England and the Northeast around that time. But if you could both talk to me a little bit about Pilobolus, about that history and what's so unique, what's so different about it from a traditional modern dance company or even a more contemporary modern dance company that's so focused on a school of movement and working with bodies trained in traditional ways and traditional proscenium theaters, whereas Pilobolus expands to use bodies in all kinds of ways that people didn't imagine before Pilobolus.
Yeah, that's
So,
true, for sure. I mean, at the time, like you're saying, what Pilobolus was doing on the stage was not what you were used to seeing on the stage. When the guys went in, so the class that they started Pilobolus out of was a class that was taught by Allison Chase. And she was one of the few females at Dartmouth at the time because it was not a coeducational system yet. And they went into the class and she knew pretty quickly that she had very intelligent movers. They were all athletes in some way, shape, or form. And they were all a little nervous about being in the class. So she moved them into the idea of creating dance that was not, did not require them to know any traditional dance moves. They were natural runners, rollers, jumpers, and she immediately got them making work based on the movement that they already did. They were all very intelligent as well, so they were grabbing inspiration from many different places. And the story that they like to tell is that the fear kind of made them cling to each other. And that is where the partnering and that physics approach to movement came in. I think the biggest difference between what was going on the stages at the time and what Pilobolus brought was humor. You know, they made people laugh, and that wasn't what was normal.
Yeah, dance in the
Go to a modern
60s and
dance.
70s was very serious.
Yeah.
There's, you know, I was struck by, do you know if there's any connection between what they were doing and the like the evolution, the development of contact improvisation, which also happened in the 70s? It sounds like they were really doing something on their own up there away from New York and the cities. But I wondered what you just described of like running, rolling, not traditional dance training, working with each other's bodies and momentum and what they could discover. Do you know if there's any contact improvisation connection there?
Well, I don't think there is in the way that you might think there is. But you have to understand, you know, this was a time, as you mentioned, Jordan, like this is a time where lots was going on in this country, and there was a counterculture of questioning givens and authority, and you know, I think I think at Dartmouth they were like almost a little bit like the teachers were probably a little afraid of them, of, you know, they were doing all this. I mean, they had sit-ins and they were doing crazy stuff, and there were these great stories that we've heard from our founders, Michael Tracy and Jonathan Wilkin and Moses Pendleton, who were really kind of the first guys to say like, let's make this a thing, and then joined by Robbie Barnett, and Allison and Martha Clark. But I was, Renee and we've talked about how like this was a special chemistry of people at a certain place in time, at a certain place in the country, and there were very certain specific people. So I think the same thing, the reason that Contact Improv was emerging was connected to the same reasons that Pilobolus was emerging. And when you look at like Martha Clark's biography, like before she ever did anything with Pilobolus, it was like a who's who of dance. And Allison didn't just like kind of just come out and just she was trained. She worked with Merce. She had a lot of improv training. She knew early on, that there was this idea of how, both Renee and I have been fortunate enough to work with Allison a lot, make a lot of work, and I've worked with her during Pilobolus and after she left the company, and she just like asking some of those questions were just like really revealing to me, because you could either, I think, you could be a dance teacher and be kind of like a dictator, like look like this, and you're trying to look like someone else, or you can be a catalyst, and that is what's different. And I think the other thing that you're touching on that make Pilobolus so different in those early days is that they were really a collective.
I was about to talk about that again from Renee's description of the way they were working physically. And I think also their isolation, and because nobody was the boss. It wasn't like choreographer, director, and dancers who fit a certain kind of technique and look. And they were really coming up with it together, what they could do together, yeah?
And even in the pieces that were solos in those early days, it was like everybody was in there kind of making these decisions as a group. It was a group, it was like a physical think tank, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of that. That's a great phrase. I love that.
I should write that. I never said that before.
So do you think, 50 years is a long time and the culture has changed a lot, dance has changed a lot, but thinking now, what do you think keeps the company relevant and popular? Because you are very popular. What can you make a connection between that original, really open, experimental, playful, collaborative ethos that birthed Pilobolus and its appeal over 5 decades, which is really an extraordinary thing? And now, right now, in this.
Yeah, right now.
I don't even know what to say about now. I don't know what now is.
Well, I think there's, Pilobolus sort of had to reinvent itself over and over again over the last 50 years. There's no way that we would still be here if they didn't make little tweaks along the way,
or big tweaks.
or large tweaks, yeah. Because like you said, the world changes, and Pilobolus it's a little mushroom, it's a little organism, and they named it. One of the reasons they named it after this organism is because it like moves toward the light. It's phototropic. It's it's powerful for such a tiny little thing. We're a small little organization. It's powerful. It spreads its spores like the equivalent of miles away from its stalk. So there's innovation is in its DNA. They were constantly thinking, what can we do that's new? Or not even thinking it consciously, just doing it, just getting bored and playing with something else and coming in and approaching it from a different angle. And so that was because they didn't have one person saying, we're going to do this. They were very open, and everybody was like very interested in the world and bringing things back into the work that they were making.
I was interested to see that on the program that you'll be performing at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center, there are 3 pretty early pieces from, there's Solo from the Empty Suitor from 1980, She's In from 1978, and Day 2 from 1981. So I thought it was interesting that you had that many pieces from a relatively early time in the company's history. So I wonder if you could tell me why you decided that, and tell us about your thinking in general as you shape the repertoire for this tour. Because if you have like 100 plus pieces
Right.
in your rep, so an enormous amount of material to choose from. So how'd you go about structuring this, thinking about how you're gonna represent yourselves at 5 decades?
It's an interesting question because we also started planning this before COVID,
Right. Mhm.
and then we kind of had to change a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah, well, we made a decision, Renee and I, that we wanted to kind of highlight the some of these vintage like audience favorites that in some ways kind of they're like little some of them stand for places that Pilobolus has had to change, where everyone said, well, they're done now. Like Day 2, for example, is a piece that was created without the people the 6 that we think of as Pilobolus
As
Mhm.
dancers.
as dancers.
It's
So
created on a whole new dance company.
Yes, I see Daniel Ezralo, and the only original name, it's directed by Moses Pendleton, who was one
who
of the-
directed it, but wasn't, like on the floor in the same way. And that was a moment where it was like, well, that's not going to work
Mhm,
now. First there was the like, can they do the old work
mhm.
with a new with other bodies? That
Mhm.
was like the Spam-A-Lot test, right? Like,
The
can Monty?
Spamalot test?
Yeah, because is Monty Python funny without those guys?
Oh.
And it turns out
Performing
it is funny. It's just great work.
Yeah.
And so, we believe the same is true with Pilobolus. Like, if you got to see those original guys, that's amazing. And I'm sure there's nothing like seeing the founders in the work that they created, but the work holds up. And then can you create work? There were people who were, well, it's done now, because they're not going to, so we keep kind of it's funny because when you said it was 1971, I was like, yeah, well, sort of, but Martha and Allison hadn't joined the company yet. So
Mhm.
it would be real easy there are many things in Pilobolus that don't have a hard kind of like, and then a chapter closes. It's very
Right.
organic, and it kind of like
Even
suddenly,
their start.
Like a
yeah,
mushroom.
even the beginning, right? And all of these little phases. So Renee and I thought, okay, well, we want to do this program that kind of honors a lot of this older work.
Mhm.
And we wanted to honor Jonathan Wolkin and his passing with his fantastic piece, Megawatt, that we helped create in the studio when we were dancers. And
Yes, I saw your name as the collaborators.
yeah, so you're like the people in the studio like doing weird stuff that then gets kind of assembled by your the director or the choreographer. So, but as Renee was referencing, before COVID, we had a whole there was a lot of our cast left because they went on to do other things, and we're still in touch with them, but they didn't wait for 2 years, like, I'm going to be done next year and I'm going to get like a massage license, but I'm going to do it now. Why would I wait? So COVID kind of like threw us a loop
Yeah.
for a curveball that we sort of, but like you said, it's just like, you got to course correct and change. And this program that we're doing now is just absolutely fantastic. And when we come back, then you'll see what we've been up to lately, as we've been like creating these other things while COVID's been happening. That's going to be, a lot of new things. But this program, I think, was trying to kind of represent these different phases and these different moments in Pilobolus's history, and important works that should be remembered forever.
I want to get Megan, since you mentioned working with Jonathan Wolkin on Megawatt.
Mhm.
I'd wanted to ask about the actual process of collaborating with the dancers, because a lot of the works on this program and in general, the dancers are credited with being co-creators or
Mhm.
collaborators. So since you both performed in Megawatt and were part of its creation, can you tell us something about how that works? You're not all improvising as a mass the way they probably did originally, but tell us about the process of Megawatt and how it works with the dancers.
Each piece sort of has its own genesis,
Mhm.
its own little creation story. They're all just a little bit different. With Megawatt in particular, Jonathan came in and said he had this word, and I think he pronounced it like
Megawatt?
And he
That's
knew
true. Yeah, we started with the word.
the
kind of.
word. Yeah. And he wanted to do something that was electrifying and gave
Do you know why? This piece is 2004. That's the date on the program, just for everybody's reference.
We have our theories, yeah. I
And
mean,
what
I think,
you want to say?
uh,
Oh, I'm sure it's fine to say.
yeah.
Jonathan, unbeknownst to us at that time, was suffering from an illness that would eventually take his life. And
Oh, what did he have? I saw that he passed in 2010.
Yeah, it was. I always forget the name of it actually, but it is a blood cancer.
yeah, it was
Oh, I had a cousin who passed from blood cancer. It's
Um,
unpronounceable, but
I know, and we're gonna maybe tell you
yeah, and
before
I'm
we
like
finish because
embarrassed
we're
that I
just
can't
like
remember it.
But it was so. But it was, when we look back,
mhm.
I think there was this impulse that Jonathan was bigger than life. And the way that he interacted with the dancers was just, he could get you to do things, and many people to do things that they didn't know they could do.
Mhm, mhm.
He could make you want to do something that you would have said you didn't want to do earlier, just by the sheer force of his personality and the kind of enthusiasm. He was an enthusiast,
Mhm.
and he was very close to both of us. And looking back, it seems that, like, I think this was this sort of like life energy that he was kind of putting into this work, and all it's probably the most performed of that last decade of his life. And that piece is, in fact, it's kind of a rite of passage for the dancers because it's hard to get through. But
Oh,
we
it's
thought,
physically taxing.
yes, it's like a. Did you do Megawatt? Did you ever do it on a double show day? Because and
It's fair.
it used to be a closer. It's often been a closer, but for the Big 5-0, we decided that we wanted, after COVID, it starts with a song from Primus that goes, "Here they come,
Yeah,
here they
yeah.
come." And we were like, all right, I'm just seeing myself sitting in his seat after having all these theaters shut down, and the energy of that song and the way they have a very special entrance. You can see it on YouTube. I think there's a little clip at the beginning of it somewhere. And so we decided we would do it as an opener, which means that we just decided that these dancers that you're going to see are in just fantastic shape, because it's like it's a piece that could empty your tank,
Yeah.
like you just kind of channel Jonathan's like energy. So back to your question, when we created it, it's just the way, and it's still the way that we work. It's the way Renee and I make work with the dancers now, which is that you go in with an idea or a word or a song or a concept or a theme or maybe nothing, and you kind of get in the room and stuff kind of I feel like this is something Jonathan would say. I mean, I think he says this in you mentioned earlier off camera that we had a mutual friend, Mira Bank, and in her documentary on Pilobolus, I think it's in that he says you don't you just kind of blur your eyes and then the dance starts to like appear. So the way that we work with the dancers isn't to say we were thinking about doing these turns and this shape on, you know, it's not always like that. There can be elements of that, but
Yeah.
they influence us, and it's really a dialogue back and forth. And our job as directors of Pilobolus have always been, since they've been working with outside, you know, performers that weren't themselves, is to kind of, we see what is working and you just kind of like do more of that. And for some, I don't know what you said, it's so like each piece has its own genesis. It's like hard to, it's like describing your children. You're like, well, I mean, this one's like this and this one's like that, and you love them all so much. They have their own, some of them start kind of differently, and Renee approaches working with dancers a little bit differently than I do, but then those things kind of, they kind of merge together.
But they all start with improvisation.
Yeah.
Oh,
Every
yeah?
single one of them. Yeah.
Do you start with like like an idea or a direction to improvise on or from usually?
Sometimes,
Or
like you said
always?
with Megawatt, it was like, can you just like act like you're electrified, but like I don't want it to look like electricity, but like be electrified, but not.
And then it turned into like, okay, what else looks like like what else does this? Okay, that like frying like bacon, and then like it just like started to become like wordplay. And we would start just saying things that had this electric or this energy that did this. And then we would start creating movement that looked like that. I had a dog at the time that was a nut job. And we used some of the movement that dog did in the piece.
Oh, God.
So because she had this energy.
And because, you know, that Renee, I think that you're touching on something I think we should talk about, which is that we usually start our work by noticing. Yeah. And it's not like we're in a room, like Renee and I are in our office and we're like, what do we make a dance on? And we think about it. We go out in the world and you see children or a dog or whatever it is, or nature, and that's where a lot of it can start from. And then it kind of like, it branches off and sometimes it circles back on itself and you start sifting through it. It's actually a really mysterious thing to me, that the moment, I haven't quite figured it out, because all of the answers to your question are like, sound like Zen koans or something. Like, you know, they're kind of like, how do you know you've made a bell when it rings? I mean, it happens. And there's something at a certain point in that early in the process where you go, it's about this. And it's almost like, because we have as artists a private world that we all have private worlds that we there are unshareable parts of us, like my subjective experience and perceptions and existence. I know, I've worked with Renee a long time. We've worked with each other for decades. I can intuit Renee's private world a little bit. I don't know it, but when we're in the studio together and we're with those dancers, somehow it feels like that private shared thing, actually unshareable thing, is shared, because you start making decisions that are for this thing that kind of is bigger than you, the piece. It's not just your idea. We make that joke, you know, the smartest person in the room is the room. It's
I never heard that. That's nice.
Yeah, it's not about one person's idea. And our favorite thing is when you know, like, don't you just love it when we're like, I thought that was your idea. No, that was whose idea? I thought who, and you can't even remember where it started.
It's one of the things that happens in dance and happens when you allow the physicality of the process to really let you speak and to speak through that, is that you get a communication when you dance with someone that is just different from anything else, and it's different from verbal. Even when you dance, I used to be, in the 90s, I was a salsa freak, and used to be like a club dance person, and you can just lock into somebody and you're completely intimate and in sync and comfortable, and then you go away. And it happens at a much more profound level when you're in the studio, and I can't imagine the level it gets to when you're together for years, not just months, but years.
It makes me think of your work with Trish C. Because Renee worked with Trish C, who's a choreographer for the band OK Go, who we've collaborated with.
I want to ask you about that later. But
She made a piece that the two of them made a piece. Well, I mean, it's sort of Trish's piece, but you adapted it, sort of restaged it for stage, and it was all tango. And man, that was talk about that
oh yeah,
connection, that non-verbal connection.
Yeah.
I remember once, I shouldn't tell this story. I was with a group of girlfriends at the Winter Music Conference, the ancestor to Ultra. Girlfriends all from New York, and we went into a club, and there was the right song, and I started dancing with this guy, and we just totally. And then the song was over, and I rejoined my friends. They said, "Oh, who's your friend?" I was like, "I don't know who that is."
I don't know his name.
I don't know. I never saw him before. I'll never see him again. That's, I don't know. What are you drinking? So let me ask you about, so you are still in residence. You have this really unique working living situation. You in a farmstead, yes, is that right? Kind of situation in a small town in Connecticut. Can you tell us about where you live and what your setup is? And then I want to ask you about how you choose your dancers.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, first they have to live. They
Yeah.
have to like places like this.
They have to like
Yeah,
sit down
yeah,
in Connecticut.
so-
We work out of Washington and Washington Depot, so they're two tiny
Connecticut.
little towns. And our office is in Washington Depot,
Mhm.
and that's just down the hill from Washington, and that's where our the studio that we rehearse in predominantly is in Washington.
And I'm sorry, so what kind of places are these, Washington and Washington Depot?
You ever seen the Gilmore Girls?
Yep.
Yep.
It's based
Oh,
on.
wow.
Yeah.
Literally based on this town.
Yeah.
Really?
So, yeah, there is.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Not a stoplight. There are no stoplights.
Uh-huh.
There might be one stop sign, but they're both very, very tiny towns.
Mhm.
And they're very quaint and very wonderful, full of lots of wonderful people, lots of beautiful properties, some old farms, some newer beautiful houses. Like, it's just a mix.
Mhm.
And we the place that we rehearse in is actually it's called Washington Club Hall, and it is an old town meeting hall.
Is it a Grange Hall?
I don't well, we actually our office is in the Grange.
Oh, okay.
But
For non-New Englanders, the Grange was like a community agricultural organization that you would find in these small New England towns and villages that was kind of a community center, and they still exist, big rooms where people can do stuff together.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's sort of like that. And we have been rehearsing there for 35 to 40 years.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
almost
yes.
like since
Wow.
the beginning of moving here.
A very smart room.
Right, exactly.
Well,
It's got a lot of history in that wood.
Well, you always talk about the wood.
Yeah, I mean, I love living in and being in these old buildings because they have a history, and it's like you can hear the wood speaking about what happened in a way, and it's a beautiful, the smell of it, just the whole feel of old New England.
And
it's wonderful.
You know, Renee, we have we put on YouTube it's kind of like a deep cut, but I mean, Jordan, you're going to look this up, I'm sure, because this is
Okay.
we have the very first that we know of video recording of the piece Pilobolus before there was a company Pilobolus. It's a trio.
Oh.
And it's Moses Pendleton, who was known as Rob Pendleton then, and Jonathan Wolkin, and Steve Johnson, who went off to medical school.
Okay.
We kind of did a little bit of editing on the thing just to keep it a little bit shorter and tighter, because it was what we found was an interview and 2 takes from different angles.
What's it called?
It's called Pilobolus.
Just Pilobolus. Okay.
And I think the YouTube is called something like "Man, Early Pilobolus was weird" or something like that, because they're
Okay.
wearing goggles and they're doing all this weird stuff, and it was weird. And you know, you can
They're
tell
walking
it's
around the stage going dum ba dum ba dum dum ba dum.
just like you
What
said,
a
like,
silliness, right?
Yes.
the silliness. It's like when we mentioned Monty Python. This is the '70s. This is when SNL was starting. Every rock band that was being interviewed had to be, you know, witty and have some kind of quippy thing. It was like part of, I think, the culture
Culture then.
And but also we watched this, and this was one of those things we would have never done except for shutting down when the pandemic happened, because we were like, oh, we got some time, let's edit that thing and we'll, you know, share it. And you hear in this interview Jonathan Wilkins say, oh, I don't think we could live in New York. I need to be able to sit under a pine tree and think. And Moses says something like, that kind of isolation can be really good. There's not all this pressure to create and be like or not like something else. And Renee and I looked at each other and we're like, it's still true.
Yeah.
It's maybe even more true now, you
Yeah.
know, than ever. It has to.
There's so many more distractions now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we have the phone shelf at the studio now. You come in, you put your phone on the shelf, and you go work.
Yeah,
It's, you know,
yeah. What a
but,
great idea.
but that DNA from 50 years ago is still kind of propelling us into the work that we're making now. And that's why we live in this rural community. I mean, this is more like Walden than, we're not on a commune. It's not like we're farmsteading. Although Renee and I do sometimes help out our farmer friends by taking some of their beef off their hands. Just like yesterday, we racked up on some cow. But you know, I do think that's a big part of like why we are here. I think we would make really different work if we were somewhere else.
Yeah. And as for the dancers, you know, for many, many years, all of our dancers lived in this area. And then there was a brief amount of time, well, it wasn't really brief, it was like 10 years or so, where the dancers didn't live in the area.
So explain to me how that works. How does it work now? Do they live there during season or year round, or?
So we have gone back now to asking the dancers to live in the area. So for the past year, we've been working toward it. And within the last 6 months, they started moving up here again.
We're just lucky enough to pay them a wage that they can get a place.
Yeah.
And they can live wherever they want, but
Yes.
we don't house and pay dancers for rehearsals, which allows us to be, I mean, we pay them, but we don't pay per diem. It allows us to be nimble and quick and to make things together
and to create a community.
Yeah,
like
right.
you're saying, like when you see each other, we're able to see them enough because they live here, and we're able to pay them to come and rehearse, so that they become really a group of like a family. You know, they know each other physically and emotionally, and so what you're seeing when you see them move is this entity that of 6 people that has like one hive mind, you know. And it just creates a much more unique and cohesive group of.
I want to ask what you look for and what the process of choosing dancers is like. Because I noticed even the current group of 6 that will be performing here is, I want to shout out, there's a woman named Marlon Felice, Miami.
Yeah, she went to the New World School of the Arts. Yeah,
yes,
right.
yes. Our fabulous public arts high school. And then I noticed Zachary Weiss has a degree in, computer science. He worked as a data engineer.
Yep.
Quincy Ellis, who's one of your dance captains, is gymnast, figure skater, actor, and drag artist, right?
Yep.
So it sounds like you've continued that tradition of people from varied and unconventional movement backgrounds. So how do you find your dancers? What do you look for, and how do you pick them? It's not step, kick, ball change, triple pirouette kind of audition.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we audition. So that's the simple way to say it. But our auditions are a little different. So we take movement a little bit more, I would say, primal and I don't want to say pedestrian because that's not the right thing. But like I was saying, the rolling, the jumping, the running, we take a bunch of movements that we know we want to just see how people are organized and organize themselves in the air, on the ground, while they're running. Kind of what their whole 360 understanding of what their body is doing at any given time. And that immediately, go ahead.
I was gonna say also in creativity.
Yes.
Because we've had dancers that are just, you know, we've asked to like, well, that was great, but can you do it a slightly different way? You know, auditionees, and they don't have that. That's not their wheelhouse. That's not their skill set. They are good imitators, but that's not what we need on stage.
How do you, because it sounds to me like character or personality or, you know, not just creative ability, but, you know, that they have to live this very focused life, and they have to be really engaged in the work in a way that a lot of company dancers don't have to be. How do you get a feel for that when you're picking people? I mean, maybe it might be partly self-selected. They know what they're getting into, but
sometimes they don't really. But we do also do a lot of talking. There's a lot, like, it's kind of like we see the way they move. We see whether or not they can be creative with their movement. And then we just interact with them and watch them interact and ask the dancers our current dancers to interact with them and see, you know, like, do you want to sit and have a beer or a coffee with this person? Do you want to have a conversation with this person? Do you find that person interesting? Is there chemistry? Sometimes it has to do with who is in the current company and who's going to become, like, the group of people, the cast, like how to fulfill this cast.
Yeah.
And it's not just about that one person. It's not personal, because sometimes somebody is like great and has all of these qualities, but they don't fit.
Or they audition and they're not right for that cast, and then we have someone else leave, and then that they fit in because they have to. There has, like you said, there has to be a kind of chemistry. See, Pilobolus is more like a jazz group than it's like, you know, Terry Teachout, who's a great art critic, and he was a friend of mine. He was really? So he came to one of our. He was so great, and I thought he nailed it, Jordan. He came to an audition. And he described the Pilobolus audition, and you can read this in the Times archives, and he just nailed it. And that's where I got that analogy from, because he said it's more like, or maybe it was in Mira's, he's interviewed also by Mira Bank, and he says it's more like a jazz ensemble, and it's true, because if you...
he's in the movie?
Yeah, he's like, I think he's in there for a minute. Okay. And I think so. And you know, if you take out like, our dancers aren't just dancing near each other, on each other, they're dancing with each other. And that doesn't mean that they're doing the same steps. In fact, we push against that because, like we said, we get this inspiration from clouds and trees, and they're not lollipops, and clouds aren't circles. And, you know, there's all this sort of fractal involvement that means that they're like the chemistry, they have to, you take one person out and put someone else in, everybody else has to play it differently. Because they're theatrical things. And I think you should talk about the worlds, like the sense of, like, they have to be able to alter their chemistry, their biochemistry in front of you.
Yeah.
Because
like a fungus.
What'd you say?
Like a fungus.
Like a fungus, yeah. Because we always say that each piece is its own little world. Like, we create dance pieces, yes, but we create worlds that exist on the stage that people are, like, watching kind of like come to life. And within those worlds, the dancers, the performers are showing you the interactions of the beings that exist in that world, whether they're plant, animal, human, whatever. But they are showing you this world. They're showing you the viscosity of the air. They're showing you the heat, the weight, the
atmosphere, the gravity, the relationships, and
the tension.
And they're sort of ritualistic, and you'll see in the show that we're bringing to Miami that we are going to have. I mean, they're very different worlds. And I'm not gonna, please, I'm not saying that the amount of training that they get from somewhere, it may not be from traditional
ballet class or
ballet or
Yeah.
modern or
you know, it may be, and that goes, you know, it not just the dancers you mentioned, but all of them have, while some of them do have ballet training, they all have this other world, and that's much more common now because of Title IX. It used to be like the girls were ballet, they were like dance trained, and the guys weren't. But now there's so many opportunities that in both directions that the guys are more likely to have some training, and the women are more likely to have other kind of this cross training thing. But when you see a performance, what we've been rehearsing isn't just the moves, which are incredible by themselves. It is an experience that these dancers are going to have in front of you. They're cultivating the ability to have an experience, which is why we talk about biochemistry. And that's why the screens are great. And you know, check out the stuff we've done online. There's some really cool stuff. But it is not the same as watching someone have a biochemical change. And then it just, the pheromones go out, and I just really feel like that. It just, you smell that live performance.
What is that word, that word when you're watching somebody move and you get a kinetic, is it kinetic response? What's that word?
Sometimes people call it neural mirroring and different things like that, where you feel it sort of, you kind of,
You
feel like
feel
you're
what
doing it.
they're experiencing physically. That's
Yeah.
why somebody doing grand jetés.
Yes, right. That's right.
I'm leaping.
Yeah.
I feel it. I want to jump from the worlds of the dancers to kind of a big jump. These incredible collaborations you do, Pilobolus does with all kinds of artists. And I'm gonna throw a few names out there, some of the most famous. So it's called the International Collaborators Project, right? Pilobolus started it in 2007 when you, no, that was a little before. You both started in 2011 as co-artistic directors. Is that correct?
As co-artistic directors, we, well, that's a good question. And talk about organic and morphing and things like that.
I know you were both with the company, so I'm going off the bios. Matt since
started with the
'96
company.
and you since 2000.
Yeah,
But-
and we started the transition in 2011. We took on the title in 2016.
Oh, okay.
So you see what I'm saying.
So this project, so some people out there, if you're into pop music, you might know this amazing video you did with OK Go.
Yeah,
Like
all
the
is
dancers overhead and something transparent and all this. It's so much fun. And you did a Holocaust-inspired performance project with Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are, and Brundabar, a lesser-known book. Art Spiegelman of Mouse. I was curious about what that was. Penn and Teller, Michael Mostyn, the Juggler. You know, people that are really outside of the dance world. So I know you can't talk about all of those, but could you talk about a couple of them? What did you do with Art Spiegelman?
With Art Spiegelman, that was an amazing process, actually. So, you know, the shadow work that we do.
Yes,
we have,
and I want to ask you about that as well.
Yeah, so we have a couple of shows that we use shadow puppetry and using our bodies. So it's not your traditional shadow puppetry. We take multiple bodies, we put them together, and we create.
You play with dimension and perspective, and
it started
the whole form in itself.
In the early 2000s, we made a car commercial, and that sort of developed over the years into us having 2 shows called Shadowland.
And many other people having lots of shadow shows.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
I was wondering if, because I know that you did the shadow work on the Oscars in 2007.
Yeah.
And I see the Collaborators Project, at least in the company materials, started in 2007. And I wondered if they were kind of connected in some way.
Yeah, well,
know.
we actually, it was, I think the International Collaborators Project was named in 2007 as a
Okay.
program, but it was something that we had been doing in the company. We just hadn't named it as a program, if that makes sense. Because
Mhm.
Maurice Sendak, that piece happened in 1999.
Right.
So
Oh,
there were, and Allison, created Sakutsu with Leonard Eto in 2000. Leonard Eto is a taiko drummer, an amazing taiko drummer.
oh, uh-huh.
Yeah. But what were we talking about? We were talking about Art Spiegelman. So we created, so he is a graphic artist and wrote.
Mouse
Now
creator.
everybody knows.
Yes.
Yeah, now the Pulitzer Prize winning graphic novel about the Holocaust.
Yes.
Mhm.
And what we did with him was we took our shadow images and he created a world of like a cartoon / comic book world that our shadow images lived in. And it was called Hapless Hooligan.
Hapless Hooligan?
Hooligan, yeah.
Oh.
And it was an interesting project. And it was one of those things that neither party really knew what they were getting into when they got into it. So, and they're so different. The process of creating a graphic novel is very different than the process of creating a dance piece. He just kept yelling, "Would you just ask the dancers to stop moving? I just need
His drawings don't
Yeah,
move.
yeah,
Yes, that's
exactly.
right. Can I just, I think he
Total
said,
control.
could we just cut their legs off? Before vaping, as everyone knows, because they've seen him being interviewed now, and he's just chain smoking, and man, it was just so great. And we see him at our shows now, and we just love art. And I'm so glad that people have decided to make his book a bestseller again, because everyone should read Mouse if they haven't, because
Yes.
it's great. My kids have read it, and they're in elementary and middle school, and it's real super important, and it's
And Mouse
fantastic.
too.
And we're so honored to be able to, work with people like Art. It's just been so cool.
How do you get to these people? Like, how'd you get to OK Go? Whose idea was that? Did they come to you? Did you go to them?
Actually, yeah, that was just
Hello.
a cold call. One of a
Really?
somebody
And who wanted to do that? I mean, why
we
they
were always
like?
looking for people. We thought OK Go was cool. So, one of our staff, Lily Binns, picked up the phone and called their manager. And luckily, they were, and we find this quite often actually, they were fans. Like,
Oh, cool.
I think it was, I can't remember if it was Trish or Damien who said, like, we grew up with a poster of Pilobolus on our wall.
Oh, how fabulous.
So they were totally down with just playing. And their actual, like, the way they approach making work is very similar to the way we approach it.
You'd be surprised. A lot of our collaborators have their own kind of collaboration that approaches it, and we learn from them how to collaborate. We just, like I said, we're sort of border stalkers, and there's a group of us that somehow sort of like, we're always shocked when these people that we look up to like know us or like us, but then it sort of makes sense because you're these extra tribal. I think artists are extra tribal, if that makes sense. Like, we're always on the outside of our norms, like you mentioned about the world, like the state of things. We need in the world right now, like, people kind of on the border, so we can talk to each other and work together.
Oh God, I can see we have about 5 minutes left, and I've like got all these things I want to ask you about. But okay, maybe 6 or 7. I'm going to ask about Shadowland because, so for those who don't know, in 2007, Pilobolus performed on the Oscars using this really gorgeous, magical, I don't know what to call it, technique, working with dancers, and the way that Pilobolus creates all these morphing shapes using human bodies, morphing shapes and images, which is expanded by your being in silhouette behind a screen and being able to play with perspective and size, so it becomes even more magical. And so, you're on the Oscars. Ellen DeGeneres, said you might be naked, and
Yeah.
and Shadowland, which is a piece, a narrative, this magical, surreal narrative journey of a girl who goes through all these transformations, is a really popular piece for you. Was that and I'm asking about it because one of the pieces on the center's program is Behind the Shadows.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the shadow work, what we're going to see in that piece, and how important the shadow work, I'll call it, has been to the company?
That's, by the way, that is what we call it.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what you're going to see is actually
It's kind of a first.
it's a first, and it's exactly what the title is. You get to see what goes on behind the shadows. So what we're doing is taking a piece that is in Shadowland, our show, and we're sort of pulling back the screen so you can see how we put the bodies together to create the shadow images.
And when you say sort of pulling back the screen,
We're very much
we're actually pulling a screen that's on rollers, and it moves and reveals the position that we put the dancers into to make these composite images.
And it's interesting because there are some images, most images actually, where the bodies don't actually have to be touching each other physically to create them, but it's a very Pilobolus body-on-body creation because the shadow images are touching each other. And you can't, the thing that's so unique about Pilobolus' partnering is, and a lot of the work that we do, is that you can't make it alone. It's like, our physical partnering is it's the physical representation of the way that we collaborate. When we go into a studio, nothing comes out of one person's head, and everybody in there has had their hands on it. And what is created would not have been created if there weren't those people in the room at the same time. So it's the same thing with our partnering and with our shadow work. We can't make these images alone. There are very few shadow images. There's like 2 that we make with our solo bodies. Everything else has, the bodies have to overlap in some way, and we're using
I'm crushing your head. Yeah, it's like,
yeah,
we're using the perspective,
yes,
the near the light and far away from the light to create these images.
and when you're watching it, that's what you must be doing, but the magic of puppetry, and yet it's magic. It's totally alters reality.
And you get to see the way we stack the bodies and create the lines, and you see that, and then we cover it up, and you see the image that is created. It's fun. It's a fun little piece that we put together for this program so that people can understand the process a little bit.
So we have to wind up. So I'm going to ask one of those sort of out of the blue questions. Half a century down, tell me something about what you see, imagine, hope for the next half century.
I've just been talking about that. I would like for Pilobolus to be the first dance company on Mars. I think we're the perfect company to do it.
On the space station. How about on the space station?
No. I want 80% Earth gravity.
Okay.
I don't want no gravity. I want to like do what we do, but
more aerial.
I think it will. Pilobolus, I think, is going to. It's our goal, Renee and I, as the second, the successors of this. We didn't fall into it. This wasn't something that we kind of accidentally made in our 20s. We came into this knowing what kind of institution Pilobolus is, and our belief that it needs to go on in perpetuity because it is something singular and special, and we see how it ripples out.
And how important it is to the world, not just to the dance world, but it reaches beyond the dance world. The way that we create work and the way that we collaborate and communicate with our bodies and with our voices. It's an important thing and an important platform to continue. So that's what we want to do.
All right.
In the next 50 years, we're already thinking, okay, now, like, how do we hand this off?
All right. Well, someone in the next generation of dancers, I'm sure. All right. Okay, so on that note, Annie, I took us from the beginning to the future.
There you go.
I'll let it. I'm going to turn it back over to you to remind everybody out there of when and where and how they can see this amazing work and see Pilobolus in performance in a few weeks.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Jordan, and to our panelists for participating in our dance talk this evening. Tickets for the in-person Pilobolus performance at the South Miami-Dade Cultural Arts Center are available now. The show is Saturday, February 26th at 8 p.m. Please visit our website, www.smdcac.org, to get your tickets. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And Renee and Matt, thank you for an absolutely fabulous conversation.
It was so great. Yeah, we loved it.
All right, good. I'm glad.
Bye.